and it's wonderful that you could join us tonight. I hope you're safe and well from the hurricane. Here in North Sarasota County, we were very lucky. We suffered power outage, downed trees and limbs, and that was the worst thing for most of us here. And we know in other parts of Florida, it was very much worse. One thing I have to say is our recently engaged garden manager, Kaylin Lowe, she was not so lucky. A tree damaged her house to the extent that she had to move out. And she has decided at this time to resign from her position. She's just got too much on her plate to deal with. And she will be moving out of state, at least temporarily. We wish her well, and maybe she'll come back. It's a sad thing. I'm glad to say that Kim Sullivan is now with us as our new building manager. And some of you may know her. She was our front desk docent, and she plans to keep taking a few shifts in that role as well. And we're very, very lucky to have Kim. She's a wonderful, friendly person. Please come in and say hello to her. During the hurricane, the Nature Center really held up very, very well. You may recall that when it was built 7 years ago, it was built to withhold 135 mile per hour winds. And it was also built way above flood level at the celery fields. The stormwater ponds at the celery fields can hold up to 18 feet of water, and our building is 23.5 feet. So we had absolutely no flooding whatsoever. So isn't that great? We did have some damage in our gardens though. We had about a dozen trees that toppled over. Here's some of the photographs. And so due to a call out to the Native Plant Society, Karen went into full gear here, and she contacted the Native Plant Society, Sweet Bay Nursery, and the Veterans for Common Sense. Those are the folks who have established the microforest at the celery fields. And she also contacted SAS members, and a dozen folks showed up on Saturday and working very, very hard. They righted most of the trees, and it was really, really hard work. You can see the picture on the left. I think there are about 5 people there trying to push that tree up. That's just behind the gazebo, by the way. And some of them are returning on Wednesday to finish up the job. So we're really, really grateful to them. And before the hurricane and before we opened, we always open on October the 1st, we did put a call out to SAS members to get the building in good shape. And we had more than a dozen people show up, and they scrubbed and mopped and swept and vacuumed, and the building looks absolutely fantastic. So I want to thank all of the volunteers who've come through for us. You really are a fantastic bunch. We couldn't do it without you. We couldn't do what we do. We couldn't keep the place in good shape without you. So if you have time to spare, and if you're so inclined, we'd be very happy to have you sign up to any volunteer position that you think you could fill. We know that we can match your skills to our needs. So it would be wonderful to see you. So that's me rah-rahing for volunteers. And thanks to everybody, and hope to see you out at the Nature Center soon. Okay, I'm done. Margie, you're up.
So it's great to be back with everybody online and back in the year. I guess we really are in fall 2022. It's hard to believe. Like everyone else, I hope you all survived the hurricane well. It sure was. For people who were not here, I gotta say it was very long and very scary, but nothing like what it was south of here. Actually, just an hour south of here, things even now are kind of tenuous. And what's wonderfully gratifying is to see all the rescue trucks that come into Sarasota every night. It's wonderful to kind of roll down my window and talk to people and thank them from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Missouri, and so many places. So that's been very wonderful side of this tragedy. So I'm thrilled to invite back our wonderful fall speakers. It's year 4 for Tammy and Dave McQuade. They are so wonderful. They're just like an institution of the best kind, always speaking with us in the fall. And they're going to talk tonight, as I think you all know, about Hawaii, the extinction capital of the world. They've been fortunate enough to go back and bird this beautiful and rapidly changing Hawaiian environment twice in recent years. Oh, I'm so jealous. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about them. You may recall, but they are really, gosh, they're like America's champion birders now. I mean, I was checking with them before we started this webinar, and gosh, they've got just about every record down pat. I mean, like they're the top birders in the US and everywhere. It's quite stunning. So, you know, we're lucky to have them talk to us at all because they're pretty famous. So they run the Southwest Florida Bird Alert on Facebook, and you can find them on Facebook, and you can also track their personal adventures, both for Tammy and for Dave, also on Facebook. And they also work with the American Birding Association, the ABA. Dave is on the board and Tammy is on various committees. So to refresh your memory, if you've heard them speak before, they were high school sweethearts who've always had a love for the outdoors. And their lives changed dramatically in 2012 when they saw the movie The Big Year. So the idea of counting birds and deliberately targeting species has always had a very particular appeal to them. So they started with a big weekend in 2013, and they haven't stopped since. So some of their latest really world-class records are, they are ranked #1, I think, in all of eBird for lifetime number of birds photographed at 872 species of birds. Oh my gosh. So in the United States this year, that's all 50 states, they rank #1 with 774 species. Oh, I'm so jealous. And they've got a lot of other just amazing records. So we're very glad that they can take time to talk to us. They also run local birding groups when the damage is not so great in Southwest Florida, or maybe you're in other areas leading groups now. And they're guides for the local Cape Coral Burrowing Owl Festival, which I pray we can continue this coming year. I'm so grateful that you both got through the storm so well. I thought about you often, you specifically, because I always think about, well, the people I know, you know, in Fort Myers are Tammy and Dave, and are they okay? So I'm so thrilled. That was one of the first things I did when I got power back, to see that you all were safe. So thank you very much for being here. And I think you can let them all know, but we know you got through the storm and we're totally safe. And it sounds like your boat, your wonderful McLogic boat, about which you've talked about and reported on before, is safe as well, although you can't access it. But welcome. Looking forward to hearing about Hawaii and you all.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. Good. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. And can you see it all right?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for having us again. We appreciate the opportunity to share about our passion. I guess really it's more than a passion at this point, it's an obsession. We did weather the storm very well. We were very blessed to make it through. We made it through a lot better than a lot of our friends. And so we ask you to keep all those people in your prayers. We are going to talk about Hawaii, but before I get started, we wanted to let you know that the bulk of the photos in the presentation are mine and Dave's, but there are a few in there. This is the disclaimer that are labeled internet, that we did pull off of the internet, and we didn't see who they were attributed to, or else we would have put those names. They were just public photos. And so we just wanted to let you all know about that. Hawaii. The extinction capital of the world. Hawaii is now a part of the official ABA area. There are a lot of great birds, but birding there is changing rapidly as the endemics are starting to disappear and the exotics are definitely expanding. When you bird Hawaii, you fly into Honolulu on Oahu, and typically you're going to bird Hawaii, Maui, and the Big Island. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. Hawaii is actually closer to Adak, Alaska than it is Los Angeles. It is literally in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and close to absolutely nothing. And when you're flying there from Fort Myers, it is a long flight.
The remoteness of Hawaii basically allowed for a very unique species of birds to develop. However, basically, man, along with the introduction of non-native species, basically has created a natural disaster in Hawaii. And in particular, the loss of habitat by people turning forests into pasture lands, along with the introductions of cats and rats and mongoose, have all been extremely detrimental. But the worst has been the introduction of the mosquito, which carries avian malaria. The birds in Hawaii are so remote that they had no buildup immunity to avian malaria. And this is by far one of the biggest problems that's facing Hawaiian birds. And if we take a look from 1840 to 1899, there were 10 different birds that went extinct. From 1900 to 1950, we had another 12 birds that went extinct. And from 1950 to the present, we had 10 more birds that went extinct. Most recently in 1995, the Maui nukapu, which is pictured there on the slide, went extinct. Now, technically, the Hawaiian crow is extinct in the wild, but there is a captive breeding population, so there is still hope. But so far, the outlook is pretty grim for the Hawaiian crow, too. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, there are currently 10 birds in Hawaii that are classified as vulnerable. Tammy and I are fortunate we've been able to see all 10 of these birds. There are 9 that are classified as endangered. So far, we've been able to see 8 of the 9. We have not gotten to see the Maui parrotbill, which we'll talk a little bit more about here shortly. And the IUCN has 5 birds that are classified as critically endangered. And so far, the only one on this list we have not been able to see is the ko'i. Now, there are multiple agencies that are working around Hawaii, setting up different traps to capture and kill the mongoose, like the one that you see on the left, on the right side of the screen. And there are multiple traps that are set up to kill the rats, which you see on the left. The little black box is actually a container that the rat goes into and gets stuck in. The little red and white piston over the other side is a CO2 cartridge that actually hits the rat and kills them. So again, they're making major headway at reducing the amount of rats, the cats on the island, and the mongoose. But the biggest problem for the forest birds is that they don't have an effective solution for the mosquitoes. Another problem is that the native plants are actually in trouble because of a fungal disease called rapid ohia death. The endemic birds need these plants to survive. So consequently, when you go into these different parks that we're going to be talking about, you'll typically find a spray bottle of alcohol at the entrance to a lot of these parks, or your guide will actually go ahead and bring it with them to spray off the bottom of your shoes to kill any of the exotics or funguses that could potentially attach to your shoe. So if there's only one thing that you get out of our talk today, it's that if you're ever, have ever thought of going to Hawaii, or if you're thinking about going to Hawaii, our recommendation is go sooner than later. And we hope that the rest of our presentation will encourage you to do that.
So we're going to focus on Oahu. It's very populated, but it offers some really great birds. I'm going to point to a couple areas that we focus on. Kapiolani Park has a lot of great exotics. You can get there very easily, and you just walk to the park and there's just tons of great exotic birds there. Aiea Ridge Trail is great for the endemics on Oahu, and the Kahuku Golf Course is well known. It's a very famous spot for going to and getting the bristle-thighed curlew. And we've also done sea watches there, so it's a pretty good place for that as well. One of the spots people don't necessarily think about, though, is birding the Honolulu airport. It is it's a great place to go to actually look for birds. And maybe it's just your layover from Asia, but or maybe you're flying in there, to actually bird on Oahu, whatever. They have a little cultural garden there that's in the middle of the airport. It's a beautiful little garden full of exotics. Dave and I had spotted and zebra doves there, red-crested cardinals, warbling white-eyes. We had a saffron finch. We actually ended up with 11 species there in September, and it was a great, quiet, beautiful place to sit and wait for your flight. Now, Oahu has some endemics, and one of them is the Oahu Elepaio. It's an endemic monarch flycatcher. It's endemic to Oahu. There's also a Hawaii Elepaio and a Kauai Elepaio, and they're named after the respective islands they're found on. But the Oahu Elepaio is it's the one that has the most concern. It's actually listed as endangered. Their population has declined by over 50% since just the 1990s. And they say there are fewer than 1,200 birds remaining. Dave and I really found that to be the case. It was one of the harder birds for us to find, and I don't think we would have found it if it hadn't been for having a guide. Also on the right, we have pictured the Oahu Amakihi, which is an endemic honey creeper that is also listed as vulnerable. Now, we've had both of these birds on the Aiea Trail on Oahu. Okay. White terns can be seen nesting and roosting along the busy streets of Honolulu. They are such beautiful terns. And it's so nice that they've adapted so well to the busy and very populated streets and area of Honolulu. Very easy to see. You just drive to this one section and look up in the trees, and they're nesting and perching up there. On the right side, we have a picture of a bristle-thighed curlew. These birds can be seen from August through April at the Kahuku Golf Course. There's also a graveyard next door, so you can look over there, and there a lot of times they're perching on some of the tombstones. These birds actually breed in Nome in the summertime. Dave and I, when we go up and bird in Nome in June, we go down the
the Cougar Rock Road.
Cougar Rock Road, and we hike up a mountain there, and we get bristle-thighed curlew there, but they spend their winters in Hawaii. So I think these birds are actually pretty smart because they spend the summer in Nome and the winter in Hawaii, which is not really a bad lifestyle when you think about it.
Now, Maui is realistic, not a place that I would plan on spending a lot of time. There are really, two key places to bird, Hosmer Grove and Wycomaway Preserve. Wycomaway Preserve only takes 6 people in on the second Saturday of each month into their 8,951 acre preserve. It's managed and overseen by the Nature Conservancy. And so far, Tammy and I have not actually tried to get into the system to actually get in there because our times haven't worked out correctly. But they open up the computer system, if you're thinking about doing this, 1 month before the Saturday at 8 a.m. Hawaii time. And our understanding is the 6 spots fill instantly. So you got to have a little bit of luck to be able to even get into Wycomaway. But it's the only place that you're going to be able to see the Maui bill parrot on the left and the ko'i. Again, these are the last 2 endemic forest birds on in the Hawaiian Islands that we have not seen. Both of these birds, have been captured and put into breeding programs, but they've really had horrible results at trying to reintroduce these birds back into the wild, because literally last time they did, within 30 days, they all contracted avian malaria and they all died. So again, this is something where they're trying to capture these birds, put a lot of them into captive breeding programs. And the belief is that if you don't see these birds in the wild in the next few years, unfortunately, you're probably not going to see them in the wild until they can figure out how to eliminate mosquitoes in Hawaii. And with the Nature Conservancy only taking 6 people a month into the preserve, it doesn't look real promising that the bulk of us will ever be able to get in there. On our first trip to Hawaii in 2019, we didn't even plan on making a trip to Maui. This year, we actually hadn't planned on going to Maui either. However, we did, so well birding Hawaii, the Big Island, that we decided that, we had an extra day and a half, to spare. So we thought, let's quick hop on a plane and fly over to Maui and see if we can, pick up a potential lifer over there. And there's a place called Hosmer Grove that is right next to Wycomaway. And Hosmer Grove is a little campground area that has a 0.4 of a mile long nature trail. You can kind of see that pictured on the left. And when you get about halfway back on that nature trail, you come to a little overlook, and you can see a picture of the overlook on the right side of the screen there. This place is really just full of bird life, a lot of activity. They even have a little sign there showing what birds can be seen there. And our target was to get our lifer Maui aloeo, which you can see on the left of the screen there. Besides Wycomaway, which again, we couldn't get into, Hosmer Grove is the only other place that you can go ahead and get an aloeo. Once we got to the overlook, about 30 minutes in, our guide Mandy heard the chip notes coming from across the valley of the aloeo. And immediately we saw them come out, start working around, and we got to see 3 different aloeos. And again, the picture might not look like the greatest on the aloeo there, but that is from a pretty long distance. Again, it was on the opposite side of the valley. But overall, really just impressed with the bird life at the overlook. The area had a lot of EEVs like the one on the right there. We had apapanes, which are on the right here. They were regularly flying around. We had quite a few Hawaii Amakihis that would show up. And while we were waiting to see if we could get a better view of the aloeo, we kept seeing this one Hawaii Amakihi, which is pictured on the left there. It kept making this circuit, and it kept flying around and kept coming back to this bush, literally just 5-10 feet away from us, where there were some flowers on it. And it kept hanging out, giving us really, really good views consistently. So consistently, it was hanging around us so much that we felt we had to name the bird. So we gave it the name Tim, the Hawaii Amakihi. And as we had tourists start, filtering through, they would always stop and look at the little placard with all the birds on it. And they would see our binoculars and our cameras. And, needless to say, they would start asking questions, and they would point to all the different birds on the plaque. And when they would get to the Amakihi, it would say, oh, that's Tim. Tim will come over and land on that flower over there in the next couple of minutes. Just hang out and wait. And they looked at us like, you're crazy. And sure enough, on cue, Tim would fly back to this flower, land on it. And it was funny to watch all these people start yelling, look, Tim's back, Tim's back. And it was funny how many people got to know that Hawaii Amakihi as Tim. And I bet, these people are going to go home from their vacation and they will never forget Tim, the Hawaii Amakihi.
Kauai is our next island we're going to talk about, aptly named the Garden Island. It is very wet, very lush, and very green. It has some great birding areas on this island. Kilauea Point National Wildlife Refuge, Hanalei National Wildlife Refuge, Port Allen, where we did sea watches, and the Mohihi Trail. So we're going to talk about the dreaded Mohihi Trail. In 2019, we attempted to hike the Mohihi Trail. It is, for the most part, the only place you can see 3 very special endemics: the Akeke, the Akakihi, and the Pu'e'ai. And I want to tell you, some of these names are not easy to spit out, especially 3 in a row. So I've worked pretty hard at that. The trail is approximately 10 miles round trip. It's very steep, very muddy and treacherous, and at times the path isn't even as wide as your foot. In 2019, we had to actually abandon our first attempt because the river that flows over the road was up so high that I deemed it unsafe to drive our Jeep over. Now, Dave and Mandy, I'm looking at this river rapidly flowing over the road, and Dave and our guide Mandy, they actually had to get out of the car and inspect it to determine that the 3 to 4 feet of rushing water over top of this road, whether it was safe or not. It didn't take me but about 2 seconds, but they actually had to inspect it. But anyway, I'm not bitter. So anyway, we went back the next day and the water had gone down and we were finally able to safely get across. In other words, I told them it was okay. The trail was wet and muddy and steep, and there were areas on the trail as we were going up that we actually had to bushwhack through some pretty dense vegetation. This is a video from this year that I'm going to play, and it gives you an idea. Now, it doesn't look like it's as steep as it really is here. We're on our hands and knees, using our hands to climb because it was really that steep. Unfortunately, the video doesn't necessarily show it. Anyway, about halfway up on the trail, which is around the 2.5 mile mark in 2019, we did see a Pu'e'ai and we did see an Akeke, but we ran out of time and we didn't make it the whole way up. There was still another 2 miles to go before we would get to the area where the Akakihi was located. Now, the path up to the Akakihi gets even rougher and more overgrown. So there would have been no way we could have made it given the time that it took us to climb that year. So it was so rough that we turned around, and as we're going back down the trail, I broke my ankle. I had to hike down almost 2 miles on a broken ankle, and then I had to bird 5 more days in Hawaii with a broken ankle and in a lot of pain. I actually didn't find out it was broken till I got home, and after a couple of weeks of it not getting any better, I went in and had it x-rayed, and they determined I actually had a nice little fracture. But anyway, because of that, I swore I would never go back. Thus, the title, The Dreaded Mohihi Trail. And honestly, aside from the ankle break, it was still definitely the most difficult hike I have ever done. It's much harder than the Himalayan snowcock hike in the Ruby Mountains. It is much harder than the Kalima Warbler hike in Big Bend down in Texas. So in 2022, when we were planning our trip, I said to both Mandy Talpus, our guide, and Dave, there is no way I'm doing that trail again. Well, just like every time I say this in life, never say never. Shortly after we arrived on Kauai, Mandy got a call from a member of a field team that is located up at the end of the Mohihi Trail, and they're actually capturing the Akakikis in an attempt to protect them because avian malaria is totally decimating this population, and they are being decimated very quickly. They told her that they actually had a single Akakiki at the top of the Mohihi Trail as they were hiking out for the season, and that they weren't able to actually capture the bird. So Mandy, getting this information, said, I'm just going to offer it to you guys. We can rearrange the trip if you want to go. This is probably going to be your last chance to see an Akakiki in the wild. Because if the bird lives until next spring, the researchers will probably try to capture it to protect it. Well, I have to admit, my first impulse, and actually the first words out of my mouth, were no way. But then I started thinking about it. And I knew that if I didn't go, I was never going to get to see this bird in the wild again. So eventually I agreed. And Mandy, being such a wonderful guide, rearranged everything so that the next day we could go up. It was the end of the dry season, so she assured me that it wasn't going to be nearly as muddy. And so then it wouldn't be nearly as treacherous, but it was definitely still going to be just as steep. So we off we went. And along the way, we had a lot of Kauai Elepaio here on the left. Mostly immature birds were showing themselves, and Mandy was quick to let us know that it's the immature birds that are always curious, because they would like come out and greet us. In fact, I nicknamed them Sweetie Pios instead of Elepios, because they would come out and greet us, and they would chip and hop around the tree right in front of us. They were very curious, and they got pretty close to us. And I think actually they were kind of like my little favorites. We had Oahu Amakihi and Annie Owl on the trail as well, and those are pictured here as well. As we approached the 2.5 mile mark, which is about where we turned around in 2019 and very close to where I broke my ankle, we actually had an akeke fly in for a nice look. We were not able to get pictures. Our cameras stayed in our backpack for a lot of this trip because it was so steep and treacherous. We ended up seeing 3 Pu'ai ohis, which are pictured right here on the right. And finally, we made it up to the area that all the researchers call Hog's Jaw. Have no idea why they call it that. But it's the area where they'd last seen the Akakiki. We rested and we hydrated, we walked around. There were lots of birds up there, just really a great place to bird once you get up there. They were all singing and chipping. And what I found was interesting is I'd think I was hearing a bird, and Mandy would say, well, that is an Amakihi imitating an akeke. And like she even knew that what birds were imitating what birds. These birds hear themselves and calling so rarely that they don't even know what they're supposed to sound like anymore. They mimic other birds, which makes it even more confusing, and another reason why I was so thankful we had Mandy with us. But anyway, she thought she could hear an Akakiki in the distance. And we looked around for a bit. We came into this clearing, and there it was. We got really great looks. We had excellent pictures. I think we were all just kind of standing there and very overwhelmed and amazed as we watched this really sweet little bird. It was a very emotional experience to see this bird all alone in the forest. I mean, we aren't even sure how many are left in the wild. They have tried to capture as many of them as they can to try to keep them from going into extinction. They announced at the beginning of the year, or at the end of the season, that they had 37 in captivity, And the newspaper article said they believe that there are only 40 left anywhere. So that means we're talking 2 or 3 birds possibly left in the wild, and we got to see one of them. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. We made our way back down, and it was an exhausting hike. You can see here, Dave and I have both crashed, and Mandy took a picture of us crashing on the ground. I'm pouring my drinking water on my head. I'm overheated and hot and exhausted, but we had some very gorgeous views of Waimea Canyon. It was an incredible experience. It was one none of us will ever forget. But for me, not only did I make it back down in one piece, didn't break anything this time, but I conquered my fear, which for me is always a big thing. I'm always afraid to do something. He always tells me I can do it. I end up giving in and doing it. And then I'm always glad I did. So I'm really glad I went. It was probably one of the highlight birding experiences of my life so far. So we wanted to give you an idea of what our day looked like that day, because it was probably one of the toughest birding days we've ever had, but again, also one of the most rewarding. We woke up at 3:30 in the morning. We hiked a total of 11 hours, and we made it back to our hotel around 8:30. So it was a 17-hour day. It was a long day, to say the least.
On Kauai, there's some great sea watching that can be done. And I had heard about Port Allen as being a great sea watching spot. And in particular, from April to early October, people come to see the Newell shearwater, which breed and nest on Kauai. So again, you have a mental image of seeing Newell shearwater, like this picture I pulled off of the internet. But when you actually get there, what you actually see looks a little bit more like my photograph. And that's actually a Newell shearwater in the middle of the picture. That little fuzzy thing in there, that's what it looks like. Most of the Newell shearwater that you see at Port Allen are pretty far offshore. Now, if you have a good scope, it does look a lot better in the scope. But trying to get a picture, it's not easy to get a quality picture of a Newell shearwater when they're 500 yards offshore. Yeah. But nevertheless, every now and then they say that they'll actually fly right over your head as a head up to the to the mountains for the evening. A better place for seeing birds in a lot more of a quality fashion, and probably one of my favorite places, if not my favorite place to actually do a sea watch, is Kilauea Lighthouse. Unfortunately, due to COVID, right now, they're only open Wednesday through Saturday. Ironically, we were there on a Friday, so they should have been open, but it happened to be the Friday before Labor Day, so they decided that they would just close that entire time since it was close to Labor Day. So with it being closed, we couldn't actually go all the way out to the lighthouse that you see there in the middle of the screen. These photographs are all taken from the parking lot. You can go and bird the parking lot anytime you want. And again, you'll still see all the birds. It's just that we were seeing red-tailed tropic birds from 300 yards, where they would have been 15 feet above our heads if we had been able to get out to the lighthouse point. So again, if you go, you want to make sure that you try and coincide with when they should be open. It's a great place for seeing numerous white-tailed tropic birds. We had, every time we went, we had multiple red-tailed tropic birds, hundreds of red-footed boobies, lots of wedge-tailed shearwaters. Wedge-tailed shearwaters actually come in here at night to feed their chicks. And actually, where we were set up in the parking lot, literally 3 feet away from our feet, on the other side of a fence was a little burrow with a baby wedge-tailed shearwater sitting in it. It's a great place for seeing great frigate birds, not magnificent, great frigate birds. So again, a good ABA tick there. About 10-minute drive away from Kilauea is the Hanalei National Wildlife Refuge. Again, it's a great and easy place to go ahead and see your Hawaiian coot and your Hawaiian duck. Now, of all of the birds in Hawaii, I have to be honest, these are probably the two least impressive. The Hawaiian coot looks pretty similar to our coot. The Hawaiian duck doesn't look too different than a lot of the ducks you see here in the US, but they are ABA countable, they're ABA ticks. So hey, you're 10 minutes away from Kilauea Lighthouse, run on over and you can get them ticked. From November to July, Laysan albatross are seen all over the islands, and they actually come into the Kilauea and actually nest and breed. So you can actually go ahead and get really close views. The video on the right that we're playing, that is actually an iPhone video.
In someone's yard.
In somebody's yard. And again, actually, the one on the left is in somebody's yard too. That they're just all kind of hanging out in these neighborhoods on Kauai. So for people that have maybe seen them from 300, 400, 500 yards out on a pelagic trip, to be able to see them from 10 yards away, I mean, you'll literally see people that live in these houses walk right by them. They could care less.
Okay, the Big Island. It actually is probably my favorite island for birding. There are several locations there that we highly recommend that you bird. The first one is the Hakalau National Wildlife Refuge, the Poo Trail, and the Palila Discovery Trail. And of course, Kona is where they do pelagics, and it's a great place to do Hawaiian pelagics because it's the seas are typically the calmest on that side of this island. The first place I'm going to talk about is the Hakalau Forest National Wildlife Refuge. It is absolutely incredible, just fabulous. We had a friend tell us that the birds are literally dripping off the trees. And I have to kind of agree. It is amazing. There are birds everywhere. And while I'm not sure Mandy, our guide, would want us to tell you guys the birds are dripping off the trees, because maybe they aren't dripping off the trees every time she goes there.
They were when we were
there. It was incredible. It's one of the finest remaining stands of native montane rainforest in all of Hawaii. It is the habitat for 29 critically endangered species, which includes 7 birds, 1 insect, 1 mammal, and 20 plants that are found nowhere else in the world. It is gorgeous. You can only access this area with a permitted guide, and they can only bring in so many people a year. So they're really trying to protect this area while still allowing limited access. And this is one of those places where Mandy not only sprayed our feet, but she sprayed our backpacks, because we were going to put our backpacks down on the ground probably at some point. She sprayed my walking stick, because after I broke my ankle, I now don't bird Hawaii without a walking stick. So they really are trying to protect this area. A couple of our targets for the day were these 2 endangered honey creepers. The one on the left is called an Achia polau. It actually acts like a woodpecker. They don't have woodpeckers in Hawaii, but this kind of fills that niche. You can see it has a very specialized bill, and it digs holes in the ohia trees to get sap and find insects. It acts just like a woodpecker. And then the Hawaii creepers, that I have pictured here on the left. When we first arrived into the preserve, we had families of these birds right over our head. I mean, not just one here, one there. We had a whole family of both of these birds right over our head. We went there specifically for the critically endangered honey creeper, the Hawaii Akepa, that I have here on the left. There's really nowhere else to get this bird. The park was closed when we were there in 2019. There were some protests going on, so they blocked the entrance. But it was opened when we were there in September, and Mandy was able to get us into the park and just like she did with the Akakihi, she was able to get us on this Hawaii Akepa by just hearing a couple chips in the forest, which to me sounded like all the other chips in the forest. And she goes, "That's an Akepa, follow me." And she took us right to this area where we had a whole family of the Akepas right over top of us again. They were feeding in the trees. We had a mature male, a female, and my photo here is of an immature male. And we also had a good number of Hawaii Elapaios in this area. We had Apapanes, we had Eevees. It was a fabulous day, really. So when you go, you really need to go with a guide that can get you into this park. Another park that Dave and I have been to now twice, both times we've been to Hawaii birding, is the Poo Trail. It's about 4 miles long one way. You don't have to walk the whole way. You can turn around and walk back out at any point that you want, but it is a pretty incredible place. We birded it the first time when I had a broken ankle, so I didn't really have the fondest memories of it from the first trip. But this second trip, we went back and I was feeling much better, obviously. You walk over old lava flows. You have a beautiful view of Mauna Loa with all the observatories in the distance. You hike through some native tree stands where you'll get to see just all kinds of birds. It's open to the public. It's very accessible. Because these last two preserves I was talking to you about, they're both up at higher elevation, so they're both cooler temperatures. It's not really hot for hiking. There's not huge elevation change, so you're not climbing up on your hands and knees like you are on the Mohihi Trail. We actually had the Akiopalau, the bird I showed you in the last couple slides, the one I said acts like a woodpecker. We actually had that bird both times in this park and were able to get pictures. We had Eevees, Apapanes. We also got Omao, which really, I think this was the only place that we saw an Omaho.
We heard them, but we never saw them in other places.
It's a Hawaiian thrush that's listed as vulnerable. I mean, just like most thrush, I wouldn't say he was like gorgeous and stunning, but it's a very cool bird and it's vulnerable. And if you don't get it soon, you may not get it. And then we had the Hawaii Amakihi, which is pictured here on the left. I don't know what, we didn't name this one, but he might be Tim's cousin, who knows?
In 2019, we didn't really have to work too hard to find a palila. To be exact, actually, we got to see 5 different palilas on the Discovery Trail back in 2019 with Mandy. This is one of the photographs I took of a palila. Yeah, I think this is a great example of how their native habitat of what's called mamame trees has been removed in favor of pasture lands for cattle and sheep. And the area over here that's kind of outlined in this mustard yellow, this used to be their original range 100 years ago. As of today, it's now reduced down to about 5% of its original range, and it's just this little yellow area right here. So they've basically, in essence, have lost 95% of their territory, predominantly due to all of the forest trees being removed and cattle and sheep have been brought in. So if we go back 22 years ago to 2000, the population was estimated at about 7,000 palila in 2000. By the time we were there in 2019, it was estimated at 1,438 birds. Big reduction, but still 1,438 birds. By last year, the population estimate had dropped to 678 birds, a 52% reduction from 2019 to 2021. 2022, when they come up with the, with their estimate, I guarantee it's going to be substantially less. We spent half a day this trip looking for the bird, never found it. And Mandy told us that so far, 90% of her trips this year, she's dipped on this bird. So again, it's obvious that the bird is in serious decline, and that's why the IUCN has it listed as critically endangered. Now, Hawaii only has one hawk. Surprise, surprise, it's called the Hawaiian hawk. Again, easiest to see in Hakalau, that national wildlife refuge that we just love. But you can also see them over around Hilo on the windward side of the Big Island. Again, you got to look around for them a little bit. They're not real plentiful, but they are around. There's also a lot of short-eared owls. This is the Hawaiian subspecies of the short-eared owl. Because Mauna Kea is about 13,800 feet above sea level, it's really good at blocking the trade winds that tend to blow across the Big Island. So what it does is it makes the waters off of Kona some of the calmer, at least relatively calmer waters in the Hawaiian Islands. So if you look kind of in the middle there, you can kind of see, this is our actual trail tracker that I made, for the pelagic that we did, a couple, last month. From April to September is prime time, for doing pelagics. And if you've never seen a black noddy, great time to see a black noddy there. But one of the main draws is actually the Bulwer's petrel there. Great place to see Bulwer's petrels. Hawaiian petrels, obviously they breed there on the islands, which is another big target species. But probably the most consistent pelagic bird that we saw were wedge-tailed shearwaters, mainly what are called light morph wedge-tailed shearwaters, but there were also a few of the dark morphs, and there were some other less frequently, common birds that we saw on the pelagic too. And there's always the potential for rarities on these pelagics that you go on off of Kona. Now, we knew that endemic forest birds were in trouble, but we didn't realize that the seabirds were too. And what happens is they fly up into the mountain at night, to feed their young. And the problem is they're hitting telephone lines, they're hitting power lines, and they're dying. So there are several different organizations that are working on trying to put up what are called reflective diverters and LED diverters to help keep the birds from flying into the lines. We were able to meet a young man, Adrian Burke, out there that patrols up and down the islands looking for downed birds. And obviously, if he comes across one, if it looks like the bird can be saved, he takes it in for rehabilitation. And then what they do is they go back and they put these LED and reflective diverters up so that as the birds are flying up at night, they can see that there's something there and they divert away from it. And it was really cool. When we were going up to, the Mohihi Trail, we were, we left at 4:15 in the morning. So as we were driving, up this one road, we could look down and see all of these flashing LED diverters that were on the power lines. And it was kind of neat to sit there and see how it made it pretty easy to tell exactly where these power lines were.
There are a few other Hawaiian specialties we want to briefly mention: the Hawaiian goose or the nene. We had these in several locations. We saw the most in Hakalau, but we did have them in other places as well. And Pacific golden plovers are literally everywhere. At least they were the time of year in September when we were there. We had them walking around our resort. So they're two really great birds. Hawaiian exotics, for expediency, we're not going to go in depth on these, but we've coded them with what islands they can be found on. It's pretty self-explanatory. H is the big island of Hawaii, K is Kauai, M Maui, O Oahu. The picture on the left is a chestnut-bellied sand grouse. They actually hang out in the soccer field on the Big Island. So apparently they're football players. Java sparrows can be found everywhere. You just want to look for a feeder at your resort. At our resort, we had like 50 of them right outside where we were having breakfast. They're so beautiful. Red avidavit's probably the prettiest exotic, in my opinion, in
Definitely.
the Hawaiian Islands. I mean, it's a stunning bird. We get them in a very small area, like one little bush off of a road, and there's a pull off, and it's just not an easy place that you would think to go there. Without the help of a guide, we probably wouldn't have found these birds. Excuse me. And we also had African silverbill in the same bush. So that was a twofer. We have the red crested cardinals, which we got at the Oahu airport. Yellow-billed cardinals can only be found on the Big Island, but they're kind of everywhere as well. They're really pretty. Red-billed leothrix, one of my favorite exotics there. I just think they're really sweet and they're pretty with their little pink bills. And Kalige pheasant, we had both of those at Hakalau, but there's a healthy population of both of these birds on Oahu as well. Eurasian skylark, we actually got one of these driving up the Big Island. And so they were just right out by the road. So they're around. Wames, we've had them on 2 or 3 islands now. Chestnut munias, they hang out in all the parks. You can see this picture was in mowed grass. So you can find those at a lot of the parks. White-went shama, I don't think they're as common to see.
They're a little skittish.
They're a little skittish. So in fact, this year, I don't even think I got a great picture this year. This is a 2019 photo. Greater necklace laughing thrush. We were so excited when we got pictures of this bird because I remember walking around in the slippery mud on my broken ankle trying to get these birds. And like typical thrush, they're very skulky, and they're mostly in one park on Kauai. And so it was really hard to see them, let alone get pictures in 2019. This year we got a little luckier, I think. And we actually had a family that came in and they seemed curious and, you know, came right over top of us, and we were able to get a couple quick pics. So we were excited. Those were lifer photographs for us. Saffron Finch, they're found on all the islands. They're beautiful. And again, you just find them in any of the little parks. Excuse me. Kapiolani Park is a great place to get these next few birds. That's the park I mentioned on Oahu. Yellow-fronted canary, common mynas are everywhere. Spotted dove, zebra dove. For any of you who have looked for the spotted doves out in Los Angeles, there's like one little park in Compton, and it has a whole story itself. But at any rate, we always have a really hard time getting this bird, and they were everywhere in Hawaii. And zebra doves, they look a little bit like Inca doves. They're kind of cute, and they're everywhere as well. And we had huge flocks of these common wax-bills in all the parks. Again, so you can see the mowed grass, so you can see those are pretty easy to get. The francolins, which are kind of like a grouse type bird, there are 3 different species: black, gray, and urkels. And the black is definitely the hardest. We got our black on the Big Island. Urkels, they seem pretty abundant when we were in Hakalau, and the gray francolins are walking around the Big Island in neighborhoods. So they're pretty easy to get as well.
So again, as most of y'all know, we typically don't use guides very often, but I think Hawaii is kind of the exception, and would encourage people that if you are going to be birding out there to look at a guide, because first of all, you want to find a guide that has a permit to get into Hakalau.
Absolutely.
Hakalau is the place. If you can only bird one place in Hawaii,
Hakalau.
It's got to be Hakalau. You know, with all of the endemics starting to kind of lose what they're supposed to sound like, their calls are starting to become very, very close and similar in many cases. You need somebody that really is going to help differentiate, so they can get you on the target bird. And, you know, we talked about, you know, how difficult it was, you know, hiking the Mohihi Trail, but getting to the Mohihi Trail is actually a pretty big venture in itself, including driving your van across the river. Again, the average person wouldn't even know how to figure out how to get to the entrance of the Mohihi Trail. And, obviously, unlike a lot of places, there are no clubs that are scheduling pelagics out there. This is something that you have to, have your guide set up the pelagic for you. And again, even some of the exotics are starting to go ahead and they're in very, very narrow ranges. Some of them are everywhere. Some of them are very, very specific and not easy to get. But if you go through and can get all of your birds knocked out on a fairly quick time period, you can always finish up your trip by going to a luau, which is what we did at the end of our trip. So with that, we are going to go ahead and open it up for any questions that you might have, and see what questions are waiting for us.
Okay.
There is one question in the chat, Margie.
I'm not hearing.
Okay,
There we go. We got her. Do we have any questions?
Is that a question? Do you see?
Yeah, the Gita asks, I don't even see where the Mohihi Trailhead is. I am looking on my Google Maps. I live on Oahu and have seen a couple of the birds mentioned here.
Yeah, the Mohihi Trail probably is not going to be on a map. It is.
I thought it was interesting when I Googled about the Mohihi Trail, the thing it says is do not attempt to go on this trail without a professional guide. And I mean, that was one of the things that the Hawaiian tourist organization that put up this website was mentioning. And so it's maybe they've purposely taken it off the maps because it is definitely not a place you would want to go by yourself.
You have no cell phone coverage there. It would not be difficult, especially around, where the Akakihi is, to actually get disoriented and never find your way back down.
And some of the trail was so narrow and we stepped on, it was like the width of my foot. And as we stepped down, it started to cave in.
And you would go straight down about 50 to 100
Dave
feet.
would have to like grab my hand and let me hop over that section of the trail. And that was this year when we were in the dry season. So in the wet season, I just think it's not the place for just everybody to bird. It's not a place that, most people would bird, in my opinion, but for those who it's great.
I wouldn't, I've never birded in Hawaii, but I went to see a heiau, which is a traditional temple on the far side of Oahu. And to my horror, in my flip-flops, I nearly fell off a cliff.
Oh, God.
Because the vegetation, it looks like you've got a lot of vegetation, but when you talk about narrow trails, I was being real careful, but boy, and I think some of those Hawaiian spirits don't want you messing around. So you do have to.
In all of Hawaii, that is the only place that we've been that I feel that way. Everywhere else is very accessible.
Oh, great.
Allow that
it's flat.
I mean,
and you don't even go but a few
amazing.
hundred yards.
Yeah, and
Right.
anybody can bird Hakalau as long as you're with a guide that has a permit.
Yeah.
So you're not. I mean, you're missing out on a couple birds by not doing the Mohihi Trail, but really everything else is totally accessible to everyone.
That's great. That's just great. Somebody wanted to know the name of your guide. Actually, I do too. I think I've heard of her before.
Both years that we have gone, we have used Mandy Talpas, Talpas, and she's Hawaii
Bird Tours.
Birding Tours. I
And
think.
actually, I'm turning my cell phone on. I'll get her number.
She is fabulous. She understand, in particular, some of you ladies, being a woman, she understands women in birding and some of the needs that maybe we have that men don't have, like potty breaks, things like that. She arranges great hotels at discounts. She has fabulous transportation of her own. We adore Mandy.
And she
I
gets a
just can't speak high
discount.
enough
She gets your
about her.
baggage for free because she is a
Well, not
Hawaiian.
for-
No, well, it depends for so many, depending on your, but her
But
phone number.
anyway, she's great.
Yeah, her phone number is 808-373-6364. Again, 808-373-6364. I hope she doesn't kill me for handing out her cell phone number.
I'm sure that's her business
Yeah.
number as well, but you can reach her on the web as well. And she's great.
She's also a Facebook friend of ours, so you can find
She's
her
very
through that.
busy, so just be patient. It
And there's
might
a
take her
6-hour
a
time
while
difference.
to get back to you because she works for herself and doesn't have any office help. She also keep in mind there is a 6-hour time difference out there, so that can create.
I'd
some
like
problem.
to ask a question. How long did you spend on a typical birding trip? Was it a week in Hawaii or 10 days or what?
We were there,
Good question.
I think 9 days
Mhm.
in this last trip, and maybe even 9 days in 2019. We spent a couple extra days. We allowed for a couple extra days on the Big Island because it does have a lot more birds and a lot in the locations are a little farther apart, that kind of thing. And we did pelagic. And so I think we were there maybe 3 nights on Kona. We spent 1 night on Maui. We spent 3 nights on Oahu.
It was 11 days total. I just added it up.
Okay, and then
Okay.
we spent 2 or 3 nights in Kauai. So no more than just a couple nights on each island.
Right, okay. That's
Typically,
good to know.
some of the organizations like Wings and different things like that, they do group tours there. And I think they're usually there for like a week.
Mhm.
Now, you know, our goal was we wanted to make sure that we got every bird possible
Mhm.
that we could potentially get. So we gave ourselves a little extra time and kind of put in some wiggle room there, which is part of the reason why it allowed us to be able to go over to Maui.
Does
So-
Wings cover all 4 islands typically when they do a trip? No.
No.
Typically, I think they just do 3 islands and they do use Mandy as one of their guides. So she kind of coordinates with them. But you have to remember when you're birding in a group, you're not going to have probably the detail of the experience
Sure.
that Dick and I had going as individuals, but it's probably much cheaper too.
Right,
So,
yeah, right.
you know, it's a
right.
trade-off either way.
Did Mandy travel with you the entire time?
Yes.
She did. And so because it was a private tour, we also had to pay for her room, her meals. She has transportation, but we paid for her gas, stuff like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, she's got vehicles on all the
She
islands.
has very reliable, good vehicles, very comfortable vehicles.
Generally speaking, when people go to Hawaii, if they're not birders or if they're going with a non-birding person, you would go to Honolulu, spend a few days there. And if you had to skip an island, which one would you skip? Maui?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
because,
Maui,
yeah,
Yes.
probably.
Yeah,
because-
there's not the number of birds there.
right, okay.
You're really only giving up the Maui Alawio on, on that
Right.
island. The other birds, you can get them all over on the
Right.
big island.
On other islands, yeah.
Okay, well, this gives people an idea of how to plan a trip if they're going. And
Yep.
certainly if they're on some sort of budget as well, so.
Right, and you really want to be careful about the time of year that you go, because we went in December in 2019. It was the rainy season, so that made Kauai extremely muddy and rained every
Mhm.
day. We were there this year in September, and I don't think we got rained on even once. So, and pelagics are
Certain
better
birds
in
aren't
the
there.
spring
Yeah.
than they are in the fall, and they're
Mhm.
non-existent in the winter. So you kind of have to plan your trip around that. So if you're thinking about going, you should definitely talk to your guide, talk to your tour group or whoever you're going to go with, and just try to pick the best time of year. We are kind of limited because we're still working, believe it or not, full time. And so we have to go when we can take the time off, and which doesn't always mean it's the best time of year.
Well, was September a good time? Do you recommend that?
September was better than December. I did
Oh.
break my ankle.
Yeah, actually, there were a lot of birds that we were not able to get in December. I mean,
Yeah.
the red-tailed tropic bird was a lifer for us.
We couldn't
and,
do a pelagic in December.
Yeah, there wouldn't really be anything to get on the pelagic in December.
Mhm.
And just like going in for the laughing thrush, that was so muddy.
Oh, it was awful.
I mean, literally, you would just sink down into 4 or 5 inches of mud.
Mhm.
Where when we were in there this time,
Wasn't
I mean, my shoes came out relatively clean.
Yeah.
And the Mohihi Trail, it was
Night and day difference.
substantially easier going in dry, where when it was wet, you would like go up this slick, steep slope and your foot would just slide back down. And that's what made it so hard. You were moving a lot, but you weren't going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I expect a lot of our members are going to consider going to Hawaii now after this.
I
wonderful
I really hope that you do. These birds are just fabulous. And if you love birds and you love birding, you want to do it sooner than later, because unfortunately, I think a lot of these birds are going to be gone in the very near future.
We have a couple questions.
Yeah, somebody is asking about mosquito birth control, and is it being successful? I mean, actually, I'm asking it, is it being successful?
So there is an issue right now with getting permission to bring in a genetically modified mosquito onto the islands. They don't have permission to do that, is my understanding. And we're by far not experts on this, but our understanding was there's this hesitation with bringing in anything genetically modified onto the island. And they really don't know anything else that's going to take care of this problem. So they're not letting them do it at this point. I'm also not sure about the cost. It's trying to figure out who's going to pay for it. And so it's much easier to control the rats and the mongoose and the feral cats. The mosquitoes are by far the biggest issue, and they don't have a solution. Their biggest solution is let's capture the birds, keep them in captivity, try to breed them to boost up the population, and we'll just wait and see what happens, which isn't really working. I mean, I think they did it with, was it the Maui parrotbill?
Yeah,
And they did that with Maui parrotbill. I think that was the bird.
it was
And they introduced 30 pairs,
30 total
30 total back into the wild that they bred, and they were all dead
within 30 days.
within 30 days or
All but
some
one.
short number like that.
Wow.
So they're not successful. So now they're hesitant, even the birds they're capturing, and if they're successful at breeding them, they're hesitant to release them back in the wild because they're just not surviving the malaria.
Where do they keep the birds that they've rescued or captured to
They have
breed for
several
breeding?
different,
Yeah,
they have
there's
several
a-
different places that they're working with. San Diego Zoo is one. There is a zoo in Philadelphia. There's a total like 4 or 5 different zoos that they're working.
And I think there's a spot on Oahu that they're keeping in particular. I think that's where they're keeping the
the Akakiki.
Akakikis. Yeah, I think those are being kept on Oahu somewhere. So
Well, I certainly don't understand anything about rescue programs, but it does sound weird to fly them to the mainland to try to rescue them.
Well, I think the idea
Well,
is.
I'm not sure they're keeping them in San Diego. I don't know
Yeah,
that
that's
for a
true.
fact, but I believe it's the San Diego Zoo
That's overseeing it.
is overseeing it, but I think they're doing it in Hawaii.
Got it. Got it. Somebody asked specifically about, I'm not quite sure I understood the question, but something about these LED
Oh, yes.
blinkers or things on the wires. Are there hazards with them? I think is the question.
I mean, from what we understand, not really. Because again, as the birds are flying, the reflectors aren't that big, but as they're flying, they're able to see this. And it's kind of like, if you think about when you're driving down the road at night and you see the guy with the bicycle that has a little light flashing and there's a bicyclist up ahead of you. Again, from what we were being told, this has been a very successful program that as they put these, LED, lights up,
The birds are either flying over top of the wire or below the wire, but they're no longer flying into the wire. So it's a good thing.
Yeah. So basically they're not once they get these, diverters up, they're not going through and finding, any more dead birds in that area.
And the birds are still going up to the nests and feeding the young. So it's been a very it's one of the things they are.
One of the
doing.
few
It's very
successful things that are
successful.
actually happening.
Yeah.
Well, I think this has been a fascinating program.
There's one other, let me see, somebody has their hand raised. I'm Ray Collins.
Okay.
If you want to talk, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Well, I can't unmute. Oh, here, I can ask here. I guess he's not.
Well, if you have any other questions, I can give you all, my email address is Tammy McQuade, spelled just like it is on the presentation, no spaces, at me.com. You can ask questions to either Dave or I using that email, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Feel free to email us.
Right.
This has just been fascinating. I want to sign up to go to Hawaii now.
I want you to. I want you to go. It's wonderful.
It's really a very awesome place to bird. And really, most of the places are very easy to bird. It's just the Mohihi Trail.
Yeah, I don't want anybody to think it's horrible. It's not. It's just that one trail.
Everything else is super easy to bird.
Yeah, and really fun too. Really
Yeah.
fun.
And Hawaii is so beautiful. The Hawaiian Islands are beautiful. Even just to be flying into them is a natural high, in my opinion.
And the water's beautiful. We went snorkeling one day, which we never do anything but bird when we go anywhere, but we actually did go snorkeling, and it's just it's well worth the trip. If you guys can, if you can do it, please go. You won't be sorry.
Well, thank you so much. It's always terrific to have you and inspire us. And I always think about, wow, I've got to book that trip as soon as possible. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It was a wonderful program, and we're expecting to see you next year when you've done another. I don't know where you're going next time, but maybe Churchill or something. You can give us a program next year.
We'd love to. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody. Thank
Good
you for
night.
joining us, and we hope to see you at the Nature Center, and stay well and healthy.